Hello, hello. It's Eileen here, and I've got a quick update that I wanted to be sure to share with you before we dive into today's episode. The Resilience Room membership community is going to open its doors for new members Monday, July 28th through Friday, August 1st. If you've been thinking of joining us and want to be sure to be notified when we open, I want to encourage you to join the waitlist. You can do that at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. That's go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. We only open our doors for new members a few times per year, so if you've been thinking about joining, this is a great time for you to do that. We would love nothing more than to welcome you into our amazing community. So again, you can find all the details and join the waitlist at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. Okay, on to the episode. One way my daughter can get stuck on nearly a daily basis is when we're driving in the car and she can't stop listening to the first, I'd say 10 to 20 seconds of a specific song over and over and over and over again. She's hyper-focused on it, and it brings her so much joy. She's not harming anyone, and it's not getting her dysregulated. So that is a moment where I try as much as I can to just let it be and let her enjoy it. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hey everyone, hello, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and if you end up appreciating the topic that I'm going to cover in today's episode, then you have my good friend, Robin Goebel, to thank for it. I know many of you are familiar with Robin and her work. If you're not, then you'll definitely want to check her out. But in any case, when I was telling her that I was finally launching this podcast many, many months ago, she said, you need to cover Perseveration on that podcast. She and I both know that it is such a common challenge for parents of complex kids. And we both agreed that it is a topic that could use some special attention. So here we are. At Robin's encouragement, this episode is going to be all about perseveration. We're going to talk about what it is, how it's connected to brain differences, how to identify it in your child or your teen, and how you can support and accommodate your child through it. Perseveration, it is not only a common behavioral symptom in kids and teens and young adults who have brain-based differences, but in my experience, it often is very confusing, really misunderstood, so exhausting and frustrating for the parents who are supporting kids experiencing it. When we talk about behavioral symptoms of a brain that works differently, perseveration is, I think, one of the hardest to manage and one of the hardest behaviors to consistently approach with empathy and understanding as a parent. I remember talking to a parent, she had a teenage son, and she was describing perseveration to me, not knowing what it was. And when I said to her, oh yeah, that's perseveration, and explained exactly what that is to her, she said, oh my goodness, I cannot even believe that there is a name for it. because she could not believe that this behavior that was so, so hard existed in anyone else's reality except her own, right? It was really dominating so much time and energy in their household. And so she and I both agreed that yes, it is so, so hard to manage as a parent, but that it does help to know that it's actually a thing. Right? So if perseveration is something that you've dealt with in your home, I want you to know that I and many other parents are right there with you. And I really do hope today's episode will help you think about this specific challenging behavior differently, help you see it differently, and also give you some new ideas on how you can respond to it when it's happening. All right, so let's jump in. I want to begin with exactly what it is. And in case perseveration is a new term for you, I think it's really important to define it. I'm going to give you more of an official definition that you might see in the research, for example, and then I'll break it down into more digestible pieces in just a moment. So perseveration, it is a thought disorder that results when the brain has been changed or injured in some way. It is persistence in doing something to an exceptional level or beyond an appropriate point, often associated with damage to the frontal cortex of the brain, which controls self-awareness and inhibition. It is an inability to interrupt a task or shift from one strategy or procedure to another. In speech and language, it is the abnormal or inappropriate repetition of a sound, word, or phrase. Now, before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that I know some of you have kids who struggle with OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder. And I want to be really clear that that is different than perseveration. Perseveration is usually pleasurable for the individual that's experiencing it, while OCD is highly distressing. And people with perseveration may not and often are not aware of their behavior, while people suffering from OCD are typically very aware. So it's just important to acknowledge that sometimes what gets labeled as OCD is actually perseveration and vice versa. So I really want to make sure the distinction between the two is clear. Today's podcast focuses on perseveration and not OCD. And if you believe your child is suffering from true OCD, then you'll definitely want to be sure to work with a therapist who specializes in that diagnosis. That's really important. Alrighty, so you know, if you've been listening to this podcast, that when we are looking at a behavior and why the heck it keeps happening over and over and over again, despite our attempts to make it stop, we always begin with considering the brain behavior connection, what it is that our child cannot do or has a lot of difficulty doing because their brain works differently, and how that is then leading to the challenging behavior. So taking this small step back to consider their brain really is everything when it comes to parenting our kids in ways that actually help calm down their challenging behaviors. So asking ourselves, what cognitive skills are at play when we see perseveration? Perseveration is a direct result of not being able to be cognitively flexible. It is a brain that is cognitively rigid and gets stuck very easily. So how do you know when your child's experiencing this? How does this show up behaviorally? If you have a child who struggles with perseveration, they often cannot transition or go with the flow. So they have extended periods of focus on a thought or a topic, even when there has been a change in the conversation or a change in the task. So, for example, there's a group gathering, let's say a family dinner, and everyone's talking about a certain topic. And at some point, the conversation just naturally moves on, or that topic gets dropped, and your child cannot move on. They keep coming back to it over and over again, maybe saying the same thing about it, maybe asking the same question. They want to talk it to death, and redirection is not possible. It is totally futile. Perseveration can also show up as the uncontrolled repetition of a feeling. So, for example, times when your child or teen continues to experience anger or frustration much longer than appropriate or reasonable for that situation. They just can't get past it, or they can't get through that emotion, and they're stuck in it way after the fact, right? Way after the event that got them upset in the first place. They can't shift those cognitive gears, and they get stuck very, very easily and very often. This can really present challenges in relationships, right? In friendships. When everyone else has moved on, appropriately so, and your child is just holding on to that frustration or anger and cannot let it go. Speaking of getting stuck, perseveration is also what's at play when your child or your teen gets stuck in behavioral loops. So this could be a repetitive behavior that is inappropriate or irritating. Maybe it's unsafe. It certainly is disruptive to what's happening around them, something you've talked to your child about a million times. You've explained why it's not okay, and they just keep doing it anyways. And my guess is, if you're like me, and the parents I've worked with over the years, you've tried to use consequences or lecturing them, right, with some other threat, or maybe you've gone the other direction and you've tried to bribe them to just get them to stop. But none of that impacts this behavioral loop that they're stuck in. It just continues, which, by the way, is just further evidence to me that it is a brain thing, because they'd take the bribe if they could. They want that desirable thing, right? But they can't because they're stuck. And what's really hard for us as parents is that the behavior will often grow more intense. It escalates when we try to control them and get them to stop. Through a behavioral lens, this behavior looks like selfishness or just complete disregard of others and their feelings, a complete disrespect of others, just flat out defiance. So no wonder it's so difficult for us to manage and to see it for what it is. Now, perseveration can also be getting stuck in verbal loops. So repeating the same sounds or words or phrases over and over and over again. It can be asking the same question dozens of times despite getting the same answer each and every time. So if you are a parent who has come face to face with this behavioral symptom, you know how hard it is to manage and how difficult it can be to interrupt. Typically, as I was saying before, we try to do this with our words, with lecturing. We're using our very good logic and our best reasoning to just try to get them to stop, and it doesn't work. It is a waste of your precious energy. And honestly, it is where I worry about the parents that I work with, because I know how exhausting fighting against perseveration can be and how that chronic exhaustion leads to burnout. That's why I really want you to be able to see it for what it is. And then when you can see it clearly for what it is, be able to shift your energy to helping your child in their perseveration with accommodations versus trying to control their behavior at all costs. So how can you begin to do that? How can you begin to accommodate your child when they are stuck in these ways? I always like to begin with the accommodation of seeing the behavior for what it is. Remember, we can't attune to our kids and meet them where they are in that distress and help them if we don't know what's happening inside of them first. Otherwise, we try to help, but we begin trying to help in the wrong place. So step one is seeing it for what it is. What's really going on with your child in these moments? They're stuck. They're experiencing behavioral symptoms that show you that they're really stuck. So just that alone, that acknowledgement can help soften us. It helps us be more empathetic. That's always step one, and it is such a loving and generous accommodation. The next accommodation is to get clear on why this is happening. What lagging cognitive skills are at play here? We've already mentioned the biggie, which is rigid thinking, but it could also involve poor impulse control. It could involve poor memory. There's often lagging social and emotional skills that are at play, like their inability to see how others are perceiving them or how their actions impact others outside of themselves, and poor self-monitoring skills. There's likely more, but my point is that there is rarely just one skill set at play. And when we take a step back to think, what is this about? What cognitive skills are at play? It helps us remember the complexity. It helps us remember the complexity and what lagging skills actually need our support in order to grow. Another important added layer to mention here is brain fatigue, and how brain fatigue relates to perseveration as a behavioral symptom. When our kids' brains are tired, which happens frequently because they are working so hard to navigate a world that is not set up for them, perseveration is going to be more intense. I know with my teenage daughter, her perseveration is almost always present in one form or another. It's like a low hum in the background of our lives. She can get stuck very, very easily. But when she's anticipating something that feels hard, or maybe she's already in the middle of something that's overwhelming to her, or she's super tired, boy, oh boy, does her perseveration skyrocket in terms of intensity. So the accommodation here is when you can see it for what it is and also recognize the role of cognitive fatigue, adjusting expectations, providing more time and space for the brain to rest and to reset. Okay, what else can we do to accommodate our kids? When they're stuck in the ways that we're talking about with perseveration, a really important accommodation to remember in the face of perseveration is to not engage in the power struggles that are so easy to fall into. I know how hard, I know firsthand how hard this is. But when we understand that because our child's frontal lobe works differently, that they are cognitively stuck because of this and they're not willfully defying us, it diminishes our desire to win or to power our way through a situation. We begin to recognize that our child only gets more stuck and escalated when we do this, right? So when we disengage from the power struggle, then we're on a different path, right? Then we are on the brain first parenting path and things can go much, much differently. Asking yourself the question, is this harmful? Or will it lead to more dysregulation for my child? That is an accommodation. If the answer is no, it's not harmful, it doesn't lead them to get dysregulated, then is there something you can do to just leave them be? And then do what you need to do to manage your annoyance or your distress. Like put on headphones with music you enjoy or go to another room. That is such a generous accommodation. The intent here in this accommodation is not to ignore them, to hopefully make it stop. That is a behavioral lens, and it does not work. The intent behind this accommodation is to choose your battles and conserve your precious energy. One way my daughter can get stuck on nearly a daily basis is when we're driving in the car and she can't stop listening to the first, I'd say 10 to 20 seconds of a specific song over and over and over and over again. She's hyper-focused on it. And it brings her so much joy. She's not harming anyone, and it's not getting her dysregulated. So that is a moment where I try as much as I can to just let it be and let her enjoy it. Now, the other side of that coin is, what if it does lead to dysregulation or an escalation in behaviors? Then the accommodation is to avoid adding ambiguity or gray to the situation. So I've had many parents learn this the hard way. They want to be flexible. They want to come to some sort of compromise with their child, but their child cannot do it. Remember, this is about cognitive rigidity. I had a mom whose son perseverated on a specific video game. Not all video games, but just this one. And every single time he played it, it ended very, very badly. Usually with something broken, with verbal aggression towards her. It was not good. And she wanted to be flexible by coming up with a plan that would allow him to still be able to play it, but limit the amount of time, because she could see the pattern that when he played it for a certain amount of time, that's when the escalation happened, right? So she wanted to avoid that point where the wheels fell off and where there was this really scary and destructive behavior and aggression that resulted. He could not do it. He couldn't manage the gray or that middle ground of, you can do it, but only within these parameters, only for a limited amount of time. He needed it to be an all or nothing thing. That was the accommodation. It had to be black and white for him. Many kids with brain-based differences need to have this very black and white boundary, where the thing that they are hyper-focused on that leads to dysregulation eventually needs to be completely avoided or eliminated, just not available to them, if at all possible. Another really great accommodation, especially for getting stuck in verbal loops, is making it more visual. What I mean by that is, when a child is perseverating over a question on their mind and we respond with a verbal response, they may not be able to hold on to that information and then integrate it into their understanding. This could be because they're overly preoccupied on the actual question that is puzzling them. Maybe it's because they have slower verbal processing. Maybe it's both. In any case, sometimes if we explain the answer visually, like we draw a picture or we write down the response that they can then refer to and see it later over and over and over again, sometimes that results in them feeling satisfied that they have the information that they need. Using distraction or play is another great accommodation. So my husband is really skilled at this. He's really skilled at this accommodation because he's very playful and he can be really silly in a way that doesn't dysregulate my daughter, but it can get her unstuck. So what does your child love more than anything else? What can make them laugh every time? Is there a game or a book or a shared activity that always captures their attention? And how can you use those ideas to help them get unstuck? And just so that you know, so you can anticipate this, when you use this accommodation of humor and play and distraction to get your child unstuck, you will likely have this little voice that creeps up when you're doing this saying, you're rewarding your child for bad behavior. What are you doing? They're going to think they can do this all the time, right? So that's part of the practice too, quieting that voice and reminding yourself and feeling fully confident that you are not rewarding them for bad behavior. You're recognizing that this is a brain thing and that they need your help to get unstuck. If you are a parent who is managing perseveration on a daily basis, again, I just want you to know that you are not alone. You are doing an incredible job in a really hard situation. Supporting our kids through the symptom, it can leave our nervous systems really frazzled, right? It is as hard as you think it is. So I hope you can give yourself lots of grace and self-compassion as you do the very hard work of loving and caring for your complex child. Hey, before we say goodbye, I wanted to be sure you are aware of a free workshop that I created for parents just like you that you can access for free and instantly. It's called Brain First, the essential framework for parenting your child with challenging behaviors. And you can access this workshop at go.eileendivine.com/free workshop. Again, that's go.eileendivine.com/free workshop. I hope it's helpful to you as you work so hard to support your complex child.